Let me tell you about my neighborhood. That was 18th and Vine. Guy would come here from Oklahoma, say, Buck, I've got a cousin here, but I haven't seen him in a long time and I don't know his address. I said, listen, do you know him when you see him? Say, yes, I know him. I said, well, you just stand right here on this corner. Before this Saturday night is over, he's got to show up on 18th and Vine.
At the end of the First World War, our soldiers returned in victory from the battlefields of France. They had fought to make the world safe for democracy. Yet another battle raged at home. In Missouri, Jim Crow was alive and well. But by the 1920s, more than 30,000 African Americans would call Kansas City home.
Blacks at that time didn't live past 27th Street. There was a boundary south. They could not buy property, they could not lease property, they could not rent property. It was just understood.
A few small pockets of black families did live in the outskirts of the city, but 18th and Vine was the heart of Kansas City's growing black community.
No matter where you live, you went to Lincoln High School, and we didn't have buses to take us. You got there the best way you could.
All around, from the Kansas side and the Missouri side, came to Lincoln High School, and you could hardly walk in the halls. It was just that congested.
Oh, I thought at one time that I would really like to be the singer with a band. I just thought that would be a wonderful thing to do. I started going over to the Musicians Union and just singing with some of the musicians there. And eventually I auditioned with Harlan Leonard's band and was hired.
I come over to Kansas City, Missouri in 1938 when I was 15 years old by myself, going to the shows. They took the streetcar, that's what we was riding those days. Went right straight down 18th Street. And all I had to do was hop off and hop back on.
We went to the movies practically every week.
The Lincoln Theater was at 18th and Lydia, and the Gym Theater was between Vine and Woodland. So Saturday night, you went to 18th and Vine.
Would you believe that one of the main things we did was get sharp as a tack and stand on the corner and look at one another?
Watch the girls.
They loved to dress in them days.
And I was sharp because, see, hey, I was dressed from head to toe. Shoes shine, a nice hat on, a tie, and a nice sport coat.
But you didn't have, if you had a girl when the Monarchs or them big bands come to town, you didn't have no girl. You didn't see her while they was in town.
But first, to get to the ball game, the band would play and lead a parade to the ballpark.
You had a nightclub called the Streets Blue Room, and it was well patronized. It was in the Streets Hotel.
If I didn't have a date and there was just girls, all you had to do was to go to 18th and Vine to the Streets Hotel, and you'd end up having a good time with somebody there that you would know.
We were not allowed in the other places, so we supported our own.
18th and Vine Street was the plaza for Afro-Americans. Most of the entertainment was within 2 or 3 blocks there.
Nightclubs, barbecue.
Millinery shop.
Every monarch would go down at Mars
You
Table.
didn't have a lot of money, but everybody tried to have tailor-made clothing in there.
Matlaw's clothing store.
The Lincoln Building was where most of the professional people had
Doctors'
their offices.
offices, lawyers.
Dentists.
People's Finance was at 18th and Vine. There was
There
insurance
was
company.
a black-owned drugstore right on
Roberts
the corner.
had the first automobile showroom.
Barbershop.
Many beauty shops. It was the area that you would naturally go to because that's where most of the business of one kind or another was taken care of.
It was either getting a job or an educational opportunity that brought people into Kansas City from smaller towns around, from further south. We had a big packing house industry that attracted railroads. There were a lot of jobs connected with railroads for blacks here.
Railroad was a good job. I'm gonna tell you, we had one of the top construction unions in the country.
We had a good time, and you haven't lived until you come to 18th and Vine. Baby, that was it.
Welcome everyone to the Builders Talk Series 2. My name is Kiana Sinks and I'll be moderating today's conversation around the 18th and Vine corridor with amazing people on our panel today that really don't need any introduction. But before we get started, I'll let Don talk about the Builders Association and some exciting things they have coming up here during this time.
Hey, Kiana, thanks so much for moderating today. Your role in this community and being a collaborator, your Up Next program, your Elevate Consulting, and now your new role with the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum speak to who you are and who you are becoming in our community. And that's really where the Builders kind of sits. We're really a community collaborator and working with industry. It's been a long history for us of advancing people's lives through commercial construction. So we are an association of commercial building contractors. We have had connection over the years with the home builders. It's a separate organization, but that's what most people think of when they hear the Builders Association and the Homes Tour and the Home Show. So we work in that space of safety training, delivering workforce and professional development training, have a training center in North Kansas City. Pretty much cover this region of Missouri and eastern Kansas. So excited to have another collaboration coming up with the Architects Institute here in Kansas City on December 3rd. We'll have 2 national economists who will focus on the Kansas and Missouri region and what their forecast is for our construction economy moving forward through the COVID era. We're so excited to have the Honorable Quinton Lucas, Mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, with us today. Thank you, Mayor. We have Bob Kendrick. Thank you. And we've got Bob Kendrick, who is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Congratulations on a 100-year anniversary for the Negro Leagues, Bob.
Good morning.
Morning, and we've got Latasha McCall, a member of the Builders and good friend who is a founder and owner of LM2 Construction, a general contracting firm here in the Kansas City region. With that, Kiana, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to be here, Mayor Quinton, Bob, Latasha. This first question goes to you. How might you envision, as it relates to 18th and Vine, the importance of the historical assets that we have here in Kansas City kick off in a way that rallies and unifies the greater Kansas City as a whole as it relates to restoring the area?
For me, I grew up, my family, I grew up in Prairie Park. My parents moved there in the 60s. We were one of the first Black families to kind of have that co-op. I went to St. Joseph School right across from Prairie Park. So, watching 18th and Vine, I see with the assets right now, you look at when people do right now go to the 18th and Vine area. They go there to see the Negro League Baseball Museum. They go there, or they go to the Jazz Museum. So, but you stop and think the assets, what's going to keep them there. I know in the past we have did some affordable housing, some multifamily housing down there, and then we've got a couple of restaurants and bars. But being a affordable housing general contractor, I think what is going to revise 18th and Vine is businesses. As you saw the video before, you see that it started with businesses back in the day from 12th to 27th Street. I think it was just, as you can see, Blacks, we had to create our own, and it was all about businesses at that time. You had barber shops. I know my Aunt Gigi had a beauty shop. And I know it was talking to my granddad, you had Pinners and several others. And then the Lincoln building was full of professional businesses. As you see, lawyers, doctors. So when you talk about what we can do, I think you've got to get businesses, not so much as bars and restaurants. I think they come after. I think you've got to bring businesses to 18th and Vine. So I think once you bring the businesses, I think, the housing comes. But as you bring housing, if you don't have grocery stores and you don't have CVS's and you don't have things around it to support it, I just don't think that it works. So for me, I think you need to bring businesses. I think you need to focus more on businesses. I see that we've got a lot of more housing, but you can bring the housing down there, but housing isn't going to keep people there. I think we need to get back to bringing businesses back to 18th and Vine.
Thank you. Mayor Quinton, I know that affordable housing is something that's very important to you. And as it relates to economic development in the 3rd District, you're no stranger to that. Could you talk a little bit about the tax policies and incentives that ultimately you would like to see under your leadership here in Kansas City over the next 3 to 5 years? Because ultimately people are afraid of, you have multi-generational families that are in that area. And so as Latasha, mentioned, you want to bring businesses, you want to bring things that are going to have long-term longevity for the district, but then ultimately people are afraid of gentrification. So how can we ensure that the policies and the things that we implement from a city level still sustains the historical assets that we have here in Kansas City?
Sorry, you'd think I'd be used to that by now, but we all do these Zoom and smart when talking on mute is, I know it gets old. Sorry to fall culprit to it. I would say first things first. The way you preserve heritage is to actually make sure you're not only preserving heritage, but you support the institutions that are a part of that. Mr. Kendrick is here. He can talk to you a lot about the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. I want to take a moment to talk about the American Jazz Museum. I had a chance to visit with their executive director the other day, the Black Archives, and others. We need to make sure that the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District continues to look to the historic, and whatever business tie-ins we have as a part of it are kind of part of that culture and heritage. I'll give an example. In the Westport area, we don't do things in Westport without Westport Neighborhood Association involvement, local businesses, folks that seem to have nothing to do with a hair care shop opening up 2 blocks down the street, but who are still part of the conversation. And so that to me is kind of an important part. What does that mean? It means that you use the 18th and Vine Policy Committee, you use the boards and commissions and ultimately your council members from the 3rd District to make sure the development continues to be consistent with community character. That doesn't mean frozen. It doesn't mean don't do anything. It means, however, that you're saying, all right, how does this sustain what we're trying to do? Nobody necessarily wants a giant Walmart across the street from, Bayou, or I guess now we call it Corner Bar. Right? Instead, what we want to do is see how can we have development that really fits the area in some sort of way. And then when you look to incentives that would be a part of it, you have to say, all right, how are the incentives the sort of thing that isn't looking to just tear down, rebuild, but instead could actually support businesses there, right? I'd like to see actually those who've been invested in the east side of Kansas City have a chance to really land opportunities with these in our area. And so what that would mean is looking to have more partnerships in development, looking to have mixed use development, housing on upper floors, for example, retail, other uses on lower floors, have a little bit of office, but we have to continue to try to build that 24-hour development. That's what gets us back to what Vine Street with the corridor looked like 100 years ago. And that's what's going to get us back to, I think, long-term viability. We have some residential, but as Ms. McCall notes, we didn't put in was neighborhood sustaining retail, right? So, you can't just, although some try, you can't just live on drinks on the corner, right? You actually need some of those other things, the bakery, the morning stops, the afternoon stops to really sustain a neighborhood. And that's the sort of attraction we need to do a better job of.
Thank you, Mayor Q. Bob, as Mayor Quinton took note, going back 100 years and now me joining the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and what we do to preserve Black baseball and the history that it has here in Kansas City, we were able to go right back into the very building February 13th of this past year to commemorate when the Negro Leagues were formed. And ultimately, as Buck said, that started, back then, it was just thriving and you had everything you needed in 18th and Vine. And so as it relates to the assets that we have, what are some of the things that you cherish the most about us being in the 18th and Vine district, and how important is it for the community to keep the forefront of that in mind as it relates to the Black Archives, Negro Leagues, American Jazz, and such?
Well, it was extremely important for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum 30 years ago when we anchored at historic 18th and Vine. And please understand that this was against the best wishes of a lot of those now who are ardent supporters of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, because when we anchored there, there was virtually nothing at 18th and Vine except the Lincoln Building. And so 18th and Vine had become, like a lot of urban areas, it had essentially died and had been left abandoned. And here we come as this fledgling startup museum led by the legendary Buck O'Neill, who had a vision that was far bigger than just the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, who said, this is where we will build this museum. The history of these leagues' origins began at 18th and Vine. And we will build this museum, and we will essentially do for this area what Black baseball had done for African-American communities across the country. Wherever you had successful Black baseball, you had thriving Black economies. And so we made that move, and it's been 30 years later, and we've not looked back. And we've seen the transformation of 18th and Vine. And while the commercial assets have maybe not come along as swiftly as we would all like them to, there's still great cause to believe that 18th and Vine will absolutely flourish. It has to this point. When you look at the wins that we've had in the district, it has been successful. You don't operate for 30 years anywhere by happenstance. And here's the little Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, now recognized as America's National Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, but it was never a self-serving proposition for us. It was always about the greater good. And one of the things that I think, and I honestly believe that it has been undervalued, and that we need to embrace and wrap our arms around the uniqueness that we do have in the district at this very moment. And what I oftentimes say is that we essentially have a cultural campus there at 18th and Vine. So if you looked at 18th and Vine like you would a college campus, and you look at the degree of cultural institutions that are operating within a 3-block radius of one another, I will challenge you to go across this country and find a city that offers that depth of cultural institutions. And this has to be valued. And you mentioned several of them. You've got the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, the American Jazz Museum, this beautiful urban youth baseball academy. You've got the Black Archives of Mid-America. You've got the Mutual Musicians Foundation. There's Alvin Ailey. There's an impending Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center being built inside this, at the site of the Pasel YMCA. The Zhao brothers building a cultural arts center there at the site of the Attic School. You won't find another city that offers that degree of cultural institutions at one central location in the country. We should be embracing this as the tremendous asset that it is. And so the resources that are needed to continue to expand on that is justified. But we're very proud to call 18th and Vine home. We've been there as long as anybody. And we're so excited about what the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum has done to help resurrect that once very proud, prominent African-American community. And as I watched the film, it brought tremendous smiles to my face to see my friend Buck O'Neill and Slick Surratt talking about what 18th and Vine used to be. And in this day and age, y'all, when we look so much forward, we look to the future, I find it compelling that we're looking at restoring 18th and Vine back to what it used to be. Yeah, when it was the place. And I have no doubt that we'll get there.
Thank you, Bob. Latasha, what do you think contractors and developers in our city and people who are rallying around maybe champion the efforts of 18th and Vine should be considered? So I know there are standard protocols and things that maybe you all should be operating in every single day, but now the challenges of still trying to connect East of Truce to 18th and Vine and still be able to kind of lean over into the Crossroads area. So what do you imagine kind of being in field to kind of oversee all of those things kind of overlap for Kansas City?
Well, like Mayor Lucas said, I see a lot of developers. As you know, we work with a lot of them. Affordable housing is my sweet spot. I care a lot about affordable housing and people. As you can see, a lot of these, I think it's very essential because you've got so many slumlords and so many people in the community that, are living in houses that are not kept up, in apartments and stuff like that. So I'm real big on, affordable housing and all around the area. I think, as Mayor Lucas says, it's just not as developers as we start to do it. I think that you've got to have affordable housing and also market rate kind of together. I think that the ones we built have been successful. So where we do the where we mix both market rate and affordable housing. But I also think also too, we ought to start thinking about the mixed use, about doing both, just not housing, as Mayor Lucas brought up. And I don't know, as 18th and Vine, I know there's a couple of developers around that area that are going to try the mixed use and the housing, but I think housing is very important. I think when you have housing, other things come. I think, as you can see, the way Power and Light was, you've got businesses, but you've got restaurants and stuff like that, but then you have housing. I know for us, right now, at our development, we're kind of going a little south. We're hoping the old Marville School right there on 75th Street, we're hoping to turn that into 37 units over there. We kind of, as my development team looked, we realized when you get ready to do housing, you also want to look at, as a contractor, everything around it. Not too far from there is Research Hospital. Not too far from there, you got the Brookside area. And so I think being a general contractor and working with developers, I don't know, I think you just have to kind of look at the area and see what's going to bring people and how it all is going to come together.
Thank you. Mayor Q, do you have any concerns about the success of economic development resulting in escalating, single family tax, or just incentives that maybe people are not really taking into consideration as it relates to connecting East of Truce, Bruce Watkins, 18th and Vine corridor as a whole?
I would say no, not exactly. And this is why. I think, and Ms. McCall hit it on the first point she made today, and I think all of us recognize it with Bob talking about the cultural campus, or I'll say Mr. Kendrick if I say Ms. McCall. But nevertheless, I'll try to be nice to the ladies, Bob. No, I think we need to try to build up 18th and Vine. And so it is not so much a, how do you see, and this is the difference I've had from some people, how do you just see rolling development to one area? Instead, sometimes, particularly in inner city development, you need to actually try to build up just kind of around it. We don't want to necessarily have to wait to activate the corner of 18th and Holmes, for example. What you want to say is there's actually a lot of great activity, interest, and energy in normal times at 18th and Vine. So how do we leverage an event at the Gym Theater, some going down to the Urban Youth Academy, folks doing events at Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and all of that to say, all right, can we have not just a club, although God bless my clubs, but something that gets people there for a nice for the 7 o'clock dinner, 2 different choices for it. Any other types of events? I was talking to somebody, I make these comparisons for no reason at all, really, but just being mayor, you learn about it. Down in the West Bottoms, they have some event that I think is like a beer festival. I forget what they call it, but nevertheless, it's every summer. Every time I go, it's about 110 degrees. And for some reason, everybody's still there. They're sweating. They bring a few bands, right? When we get that with the hot dog festival, very good work to Mr. Kendrick. But the question is, how do we leverage even more of those? How do we create more of that? How do we get more businesses and all of that? Because I will say this out of respect to our institutions there. Mr. Kendrick in the baseball, every one of these events, and I know Bob knows this, right? People think it doesn't take you any work, right? But something like a hot dog festival takes like a year to plan. You making calls, you're spending all the time, and you still got a museum to run, right? And so we need to find a way, and this is kind of on the city too, to how do we make sure we're doing our part? How do we recommend to some group or activity or interest area, like my friends who are doing yoga now over at 18th and Vine? Yeah, come to our district, be part of it, right? That's the sort of thing that we need to try to leverage and encourage. And for me, it's about how do we do that at 18th and Vine? It isn't necessarily kind of how do I wait for, and we talked about gentrification before, and this isn't a secret conversation, but among friends, I'll just say, how do we make it so it's not just a question of how do I get the developer who just built something on 18th and Broadway to pay attention to us? Because that is how you gentrify, right? And instead you say, how do I find people that are interested in this area, in its character, in its culture, and in building it to really be a part of what its future is going to be.
That's good. Bob, we talk about the Buck O'Neill Research Center and what that's going to be able to do for 18th and Vine, similar to the Plex Pod in Westport. Can you talk about, what the plans are for that? What are the hopes and dreams that not only for youth in that district, but just overall as Kansas Cityans can start patronizing down there more and coming and understanding, I might be an entrepreneur and starting up, but I'm drinking coffee in the Buck O'Neill Research Center.
Yeah, well, and for those who may not be as familiar with the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center, which is going to be built there at the site of the Pasel YMCA. The Pasel YMCA was the birthplace of the Negro Leagues. That is where Andrew Root Foster led a group of 8 independent Black baseball team owners into Kansas City. They met at that historic landmark on February 13th, 1920. And organized the Negro National League. Thus, we're celebrating 100 years of the birth of those Negro Leagues. Interesting enough, when we look at the history of the Pasel YMCA, it was a white philanthropist by the name of Julius Rosenwald, who at that time was issuing challenge grants to communities across the country to build African-American schools and African-American YMCAs. Here in Kansas City, both the African-American and white community came together and exceeded the grant requirements. And that's how we get the funds to build the Pasel YMCA. The building was completed in 1914. 6 years later, Root Foster leads that historic meeting to form the Negro National League. The building had been, again, left abandoned and boarded up. Sad to say, it was harboring illicit activity. Vagrants were living in that building, and it had become a community eyesore. Mayor, I think people forget what that building used to look like before our friend, the great barbecue baron, Ollie Gates, stepped in. He and Buck were dear friends, and he knew how much that building meant to the late Buck O'Neill, who, when he didn't get into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, he didn't lament not getting into the Hall of Fame. And for him, the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center would be his Hall of Fame, his essential and pseudo Hall of Fame. Education meant the world to Buck O'Neill, a man who was born the grandson of enslaved people. His grandfather were slaves, and a man who was denied an opportunity to be formally educated at his native Sarasota High School, but understood the value of what a great education would mean. And that we could take the history of the Negro Leagues and the life lessons that stem from this incredible story of triumph over adversity and make it applicable in the lives of young people today to give them an opportunity to learn this history, but also be inspired by this history. And so coincidentally, it would be another white philanthropist my dear friend, the late, great Landon Rowland, who bought that building from land clearance and donated it to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum so that we could redevelop that site with an opportunity to expand the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Over the course of 30 years, we've done an amazing job in building this national and internationally recognized attraction. But it was always our quest to build an institution so that we would have a place to learn about Negro Leagues and social history and the impact that it could have, you know, in helping continue to advance our society. And so we took ownership of that building. Thanks to Mr. Gates' leadership, we cleaned that building up. We shored up the exterior, we gutted the interior, and we had started an amazing transformation of that building without destroying that building. So oftentimes we tear down these buildings, but because this building had such great historical significance and connections to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, we felt like we needed to save that structural landmark, and we've done just that. And as the mayor knows, up until 2018, after we had that very unfortunate vandalism of the building, which really has set the project back momentarily. But again, you know, you have a setback to make a comeback. And so we've been dealing with that situation. We've gotten the building now cleaned up. It is rid of hazardous waste. And, you know, it was devastating to have that vandalism take place because the community had rallied around this project. Everybody was excited about this project and the transformation that had occurred. And then someone very heinously went in and simply tried to destroy the project. This wasn't your average run-of-the-mill copper theft. No, this was somebody with very destructive intent who, for some reason, did not want to see this manifest itself. But again, the community has continued to rally around. The city has been an amazing partner with us on this venture. I feel quite confident that we will get this project back moving and get that building in an operable situation. But just as importantly, guys, start that development moving west of the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District, being that connecting point, as Mayor Q talked about, so that it becomes easy for people who are doing events in the crossroads to walk to 18th and Vine. Yeah, and that's what you hope will happen, is that we can create this corridor that now takes us west and essentially connects to the energy and excitement that is happening there in Crossroads, and have these two great communities be able to have access to one another in a very safe, well-lit, urban streetscape environment. And that's what our ambition was. So again, we were always thinking beyond self and starting to think about the greater good once again, even with the development of the Pasel YMCA and of course the future home of the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center.
Thank you, Bob. Latasha, I'll ask one more question about like taxes and policy implementation. Is it fair for, you know, we see a lot of land being purchased around that particular area, and not that we don't want all Kansas Cityans to feel welcomed in our communities, but, you know, we do have to be very mindful of, you know, tax abatements and all kinds of stuff that is extended for long periods of time that essentially maybe those people should not be given. And then we go up, you know, Paseo to a single mother and her kids. Maybe that would be able to, you know, take that and really do some long-term good with it financially. So what can we do on behalf of, you know, contractors or just people in these spaces, in these rooms, having these conversations, to be mindful of really and understand that we're not just building houses and businesses, but we're really changing people's lives. When you build East of Troost and the 18th corridor and Bruce Watkins, we're changing history in our city. And as Bob said, you know, you're not going to go to another state and get that anywhere. And so here in Kansas City, we are very fortunate that we have a lot of these things, and, you know, hopefully we understand that and we take pride in that before it's too late. So what would you say, you know, to contractors and developers who might be listening to really take note of that?
Well, I think when you come down, excuse me, as contractors and developers, I know for myself, I'm really mindful of that. You know, I've worked a lot with the Ivanhoe neighborhood. And so, you know, talking to home buyers and people in there, and as contractors, we do, instead of buying up places, we do need to be mindful of residents and people that are trying to afford houses, and they need incentives as well. So when I was dealing with the neighborhoods, I had several homeowners tell me about their taxes, and they're not getting a tax incentive, but we bring in big developers and general contractors as myself who come in there, and we build market rate or big developments where we get tax incentives. And I told her that hoping that, you know, we can kind of change that. There'll be tax incentives for people that do buy homes or do have homes in the area. And, you know, what I'm seeing a lot of is that just being not only a residential builder, but also a multifamily housing builder. If you're kind of seeing in the city more and more, I'm seeing, I can't speak for other developments. I'm seeing a lot of my seniors not being able to really take care of their homes right now for taxes or take care of their houses. So right now I'm seeing a lot of developers and construction companies like myself, we're building more senior housing. And so as we do that, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer to that, but right now I am seeing, and I speak to a lot of seniors in the area, their houses, and developers are getting tax incentives to move them out of their neighborhoods and things like that. But I don't know, maybe we do need to think about that a little bit as there are people in the neighborhood that are buying homes, especially getting tax rates on affordable housing, and we're building some tax incentives. Me as a affordable housing construction company and developer, you know, we're not LM2, we're not greedy. I mean, we just, you know, it's all about, for me, getting more people in the community and keeping them here in the city, not moving so much out south or into other subdivisions. So that being said, you know, I don't know if there is a right or wrong, but I do think that we need to look at tax incentives for our more senior, and more tax incentives for our new young millennial, as I'd say, because now you've got millennial, they're not buying houses now. They're living in condos and apartments. I mean, I see it because that's what we're building them for. But I think if there were tax incentives for millennial, I don't know, do you think they buy more homes? You think we could build more homes for that? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that right now. Just praying that, I'm always thinking about more of my seniors more than anything, and how keeping them in their homes or getting them in a safe environment. So that's what we focus on.
Marquis, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just only thing to really add is we do want to make sure we have that balance of population no matter where we develop. And I would encourage, and a lot of the builders on this line will know, we have a few different tools that we've used. Sometimes it's low income basis, it's senior housing, but you really do want to make sure you're developing neighborhoods where, yeah, you're attracting the Kianas of the world, right? And so we want to make sure that there's that level of affordability, but at the same time, also some of the neighborhood amenities. Sometimes it breaks my heart. I've, of course, never looked to live out there, but I'll ask people, where do you live? And they say, I stay out in, and no offense if you stay out this way, I stay in Overland Park, or I'm out east or something like that. I'm like, why? And they're like, I got a gym at my building. I've got a pool. I've got everything under the sun. So we need to find a way, without going all the way luxury, right? There's somewhere different from one light, two light, to actually building opportunities for folks to live in a community like the 18th and Vine area, where they can find a lot of that stuff that they would need. It goes back to using incentives in the way that they were intended, which is to try to draw others in. That's why you sometimes see an incentive for something as simple, it seems, as the pharmacy or the grocery store. The Linwood Shopping Center project, Price Chopper there, wasn't built just because we like grocery stores. It's built because you want a neighborhood stabilizing force. And the thought is, okay, if people are like, okay, I can get food there, then all of a sudden that leads businesses to say there's a new opportunity for people to live. And so that's where I think we want to be long term. But the other thing that I would say about 18th and Vine, and it's why I think you have a good group of people on this call, is there's excitement to it. What do we have that Lee Summit doesn't have? Overland Park, all that? I could talk about other cities because they don't vote for me. So nevertheless, what do we have? I'm going to respect all of them, because all of y'all, no matter where you live, need to be visiting Bob's museum and investing with Latasha. So, but nevertheless, what do we have? There's this story, right? Not every neighborhood at all in this region has the story where you're walking the same streets of this amazing history, where you are so close and connected to stories that link Kansas City's past. I'll tell you one brief story. It won't go too long. I happened to meet a woman, she's since passed away, and she'd probably be about 105 if she was old enough now, who was the wife of Harry Truman's physician, and talked about what Vine Street used to be like. And I found that so interesting. This woman, I guess, knew I was in politics. And she said, oh, I didn't, white lady. So she's like, there was a different time and it was segregated and all of that. But I remember just hearing about it, hearing about all of this. My father did business over it, right? That's the story we have to share for an entire region and for an entire country. And I'm not just saying that like an old man or something. I'm just saying it because it's like, we need to make sure more people are getting this. More people know it. It's not, we said this the other day, this isn't just Buck O'Neill's story, and it isn't just Bob's story, right? It is all of our stories, and we get to build new traditions there. And I think when we talk about how we develop Kansas City and how we leverage it, Latasha knows this better than me, right? Every time people do these development projects, they come up with interesting names. And the problem I might have with the 80s and 90s is they all had these suburbanish names like the Gardens or the Hills, because people didn't want to be bothered by it. Well, let's lean into what we got in 2020. People want to, assuming this is all over soon, want to kind of be part of culture and excitement and energy. And that's what we have here.
Yeah, Merrick, you have one more question.
Again, I only offended like 30% of our viewers in that answer. So I hit the suburbs.
I have one more question for you, then Bob, and I'll let Latasha have the last word because we're coming up on the end of our time. But Merrick, can you talk about just the prosperity of Kansas City? Like, no one could predict that you would be given in your first term of mayor, just a global pandemic and just the social unrest that we have experienced in the last 8 months. And so I know that we always talk about, what you're not doing, but here at the Builders Association, the Builders Talk, we want to be a bridge about community. We want to shed light on there is good parts of Kansas City, and you are leading the train currently. And so any last remaining thoughts that you might have as it relates to just not only on behalf of you, but your office and how things are going, and maybe just how hard we're working to ensure that Kansas Cityans are important to you.
I'll say this for everybody watching, and they have wonderful protocols, all of that. Go to the museums at 18th and Vine. Walk through the moment that they're thinking of. I mean, think about 100 years ago. Influenza, pandemic, right, had finished, right? We dealt with segregation. We deal with issues. We deal with wars. You then deal with another war. Many of our players having fought in another war. We have been through a lot before. And I sometimes take solace in the stories of positivity. I mean, our forefathers, right, who dealt with so much and found a way to believe in something, believe in their families, believe in their talent, believe in a brighter future. And so what I try to do without being too Pollyannish, and and this is a challenging time. There are people that have lost their jobs, that are losing lives. So this isn't me dismissing it. Much in the same way that 100 years ago, I'm sure they were not dismissing the very real challenges around them. But sometimes I just think back to the fact this community has weathered very significant challenges before. We can weather them now. There is no reason to be pessimistic. Look, I will tell you, and I don't mean to speak for the other folks on the call, but Latasha, Bob, and my lives have probably been rocked this year. Latasha, God love her, is a developer, trying to get loans and investors and all of that in this year. Bob probably was about to have his best year ever, right? Talking about 100 years and all of that. But what do you see us here right now? We're still talking about the future. And I see my job as telling Kansas Cityans, you know what, we're going to find a way to weather this moment, and we're going to find a way to get to a future. And that means looking at some of the negatives before us, right? 2020 is this year where you're looking up and you're saying, wow, we had issues we weren't addressing. Too long, we looked over at St. Louis and Ferguson and said, man, y'all got issues with the police and the community, until all of a sudden the light is flashed on us, right? And these are the sorts of things that I think we need to look at as opportunities, although it is very hard to do that. And to say, all right, coming out of this, how can I do better? What have I learned? What can we do to give folks hope for our future? So that's kind of what I would have to say on that.
Thanks, Mayor Q. Bob, any last remaining thoughts as it relates to the late great Buck O'Neill, and maybe what he would, I know he would be excited to just know that the year that we're in and the challenges that we have. And I know you always talk about you can't be a steward of this great story of the Negro Leagues and wallow in self-pity. So as it relates to this conversation and us still having that perseverance, people on this call that are members of the Builder Association, developers, things that Latasha's been able to contribute to Kansas City, what would you like to leave people here that are listening?
Well, you're absolutely right. And as I shared with some media folks the other day, I talk to Buck almost every single day. Now, he doesn't always talk back to me, but I talk to him almost every day because the wisdom that he imparted and that he shared, but also, as Q will know, the optimism, that Buck O'Neill was the guy that was the consummate glass half full. Everybody else saw it half empty. He saw it half full. And I hope that some of that has spilled over on me, and I carry that optimism with me. And even in the midst of what has been one of the most challenging times, not only for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, but for people across this nation and around the globe, I still cling to that hope and optimism and understanding. And you mentioned, and I talk about not wallowing in self-pity and be doing a disservice to the Negro Leagues in doing so. Although admittedly, when this thing first broke out after we had gathered there at the YMCA, y'all, I was doing a little wallowing now. I ain't gonna lie. This optimism weren't quite at that level that it is right now. But you do realize that you have to get in there. And we understand that this too will come to pass. It's just about how much carnage will be left behind when it does pass. But we know it will come to pass. And the future is so very bright. Everything that we do is a building block so that others will benefit from. And that's where the selflessness of the Negro Leagues come in. You've oftentimes heard me talk about the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum essentially being the bridge builders. You see, we rarely celebrate the people who built the bridge. We always celebrate the people who cross over the bridge. But at the Negro Leagues Museum, we celebrate the bridge builders. And those are the folks who do this selflessly, knowing that they may not benefit from what they are leaving, but that's what it's all about. So for me, my challenge is to leave our museum and this city better than the way that I found it. And I think each and every one of us, and I'm sure those who are involved with this association, carry that same charge. And if we do that, it's about making a better pathway for my beautiful granddaughter, who will then hopefully instill and carry those same values, and she's going to do the same thing for that generation to come. And yes, if we're fortunate enough, like old Buck was, to enjoy the change that he helped create, that's even better. Yeah, but for us, it's about planting those seeds for a better tomorrow, and all of us collaborating to make Kansas City exactly what it is, a world-class city. But for it to maintain that status, we know that there are things that still need to be improved. 18th and Vine is one of those great areas. It is the most authentic historical experience in Kansas City. Everything that Kansas City hangs its hat on, barbecue and jazz, all originate at historic 18th and Vine. So why wouldn't we want to see 18th and Vine be everything that we expect and believe that 18th and Vine can be?
That's good. Barbecue sounds good. Latasha, I'll give you the last word before we wrap up. Just any last remaining thoughts as it relates to development. You know, this has been a challenging time for, I'm sure, like Mayor Q said, for you. Just anything that you would like for the members, including yourself, to keep in mind during this time.
Well, number one, as a developer and a general contractor, as we start doing these developments around town, I want developers and GCs to think about why we're doing it and if it's going to make a difference in that neighborhood, and are we going to help people? And then I'd also, as myself, my company, LM2, not only, but we are the only Black woman general contractor in the state of Missouri. I need to challenge myself. You know, I build in the urban core, build houses, we build senior housing, we do, in fact, probably 99% of all of my projects are in the urban core. And we talk about the 18th and Vine area. Myself, I'd like to see LM2 one day, you know, my company, you know, as people are passing by and they're visiting, they're doing jazz and you've got they're visiting the Negro League. I want them to be able to walk past one day and see, you know, LM2 right there on 18th and Vine. You know, my grandfather passed away a couple of years ago, and he had we prior to him passing away. One of the things he wanted me to do is I put him in a car and we went riding around, and we went past 18th and Vine. And as frail as he was, he kind of wanted to stand up. One of the things he did, he said, you know, Tosh, you know, you're building in the urban core. You're born and raised here in Kansas City. He said, I need you to come on back home. So hoping there'll be tax incentives, you know, LM2. So when you talk about 18th and Vine and you hear Bob and you hear Mayor Lucas and the things that we need to do, as Mayor Lucas said, we need to get businesses back there. You know, and I challenge a lot of companies, you know, Black, white, you know, coming back to the 18th and Vine, but closing, you know, that's, you know, you look at my 5-year plan, and I hope that one day, as a Black woman, female general contractor in a predominantly white male industry, that's, you know, my vision. I hope that as people are riding by, they're able to see, you know, LM2 one day there on 18th and Vine. And I stop at a coffee shop and I wave at Bob and I see all the kids, and, you know, we can have barbecue, and I'm hoping that we can, you know, we can get that 18th and Vine back. I know for several years, Congressman Cleaver and Luke and several other city councils, we've all had visions there, but I think now, you know, we've got to stop talking about it and start doing something about it.
Yeah, I was going to say busy, booked, and booming. That sounds like what we need to do.
Exactly.
Well, I want to say thank you all three for doing this, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join the Builders Association. Mayor Quinton, Latasha, Bob, your leadership in Kansas City is better because we have you here, and I'm honored to know each and every one of you all. And thank you all so much on behalf of the Builders Association for joining Builders Talk Series 2. We have one more in Q1 of 2021. My name is Kiana Sinks. And again, I'm super excited to be here before you today. And I hope you all have a great day.